Hi fellow homeschoolers, it's Amber Marie from Forging Foundations. Today I am bringing you video 2 of my 2-part series on the Good and the Beautiful Level K math curriculum. And today's video is really going to be focusing on the aspects of teaching math and how the Good and the Beautiful does such a great job of doing this. Part 1 of the video is going to be focused really on some math background as far as the different types of math you should be teaching your children in kindergarten and even first and second grade. It is really going to be focused on the importance of number sense along with some other mathematical concepts. And then in part 2 of the video today, I will be showing you why or how the Good and the Beautiful does when it comes to teaching math in that with the importance of number sense. So I do want to give you a disclaimer. There's going to be some math jargon in the beginning of the video, and I will have chapter markers below in the description box so that you can skip ahead if you really don't want to learn too much about the background of math and the building of number sense. And you won't hurt my feelings if you skip ahead. It's more of just me as a former teacher sharing what I find important about the basics and the foundations of math and number sense, and also the fact that I'm kind of a math geek and love math. So that stuff you can skip ahead by clicking on the second section of the video in the description box below if you want to get to the part where I talk about how the Good and the Beautiful uses this foundation of number sense in their curriculum. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the importance of number sense.
So before I get into why the Good and the Beautiful is so great when it comes to teaching the basics of math and number sense, I kind of want to give you a little lesson on what's important to know about number sense and the foundation of number sense, especially in the younger grades of kindergarten, first, and second. So I'm going to be referencing the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, which is also shown as NCTM, which is a committee of teachers that focus on math from all over the United States. When it comes to number sense and the foundations of addition and subtraction specifically, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics states the development of these skills and concepts should be grasped by the end of second grade. So these concepts include understanding numbers, ways of representing numbers, relationships among numbers, and number systems. It also is understanding meanings of operations and how they relate to one another. And then finally, computing fluently and making reasonable estimates. So what does this all mean? This is a lot of teacher jargon, so let's take a look at what it means. That first one, understanding numbers and ways of representing numbers, relationships among numbers, and number systems. Basically what it is your child's able to count one-to-one correspondence. That means when they're moving objects from one place to another, they're able to count 1 to 1. So when they count, let's say you have 5 counting bears, and if they move one, it's 1 bear. Then they move the next one, 2 bears, 3 bears, 4 bears, and so on. That also includes understanding that the last number they counted is the number that's total in the set. It also includes counting on and counting down, so counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and then counting 4, 3, 2, 1. This one includes naming written numerals, which just means the number, the way it looks. So if you put a number 5 in front of them, they're able to tell you it's a number 5. Naming an amount of objects, that's kind of going back to the one-to-one correspondence. So when they're looking at or when they're counting a group, being able to tell you how many are in that group. So the last number being how many are in that group. Showing numbers in different ways. This can be on number lines. It can be groups of objects just right in front of them. It can be using number symbols such as the written numeral, like 4, 5, and 6, like the actual number. It can be the number names. It can be the way they look on 10 frames. There's so many different ways to show numbers. So just having an idea and a flexibility of showing those numbers, that's one of the things that they really count as a basic foundation of number sense. Showing how numbers relate to each other, that means evens and odds, skip counting, part to whole, which deals with addition and subtraction, and so forth. And finally, understanding place values. So the ones, tens, and hundreds place values. And as they get into upper grades, they're, the thousands, the 100,000s, or the 10,000s, but that's not dealing with kindergarten first and second. Looking at the second one that they mentioned was understanding meanings of operations and how they relate to one another. This is focused really on addition and subtraction. Joining sets of objects to make a bigger group is focusing on addition. So you would give them two groups of smaller numbers, and them actually, or your child actually combining those to create a larger number is showing addition. Even before you start using equations like 1 plus 2 equals 3, actually having a group of 1, a group of 2, and combining them to create 3. Same thing goes with the separating a set of objects into smaller groups. That's known as subtraction. It's not making a number smaller, which is a misconception that a lot of children have at this age. It's not making a number smaller, it's making a group smaller by taking away parts of that group, that larger group. So the idea of separating into smaller groups. Relating adding to counting on and skip counting is just, the idea of once you are counting on, so let's say you start at 5, counting on from 5, 6, 7, 8. You're actually, your child's going to relate that to addition. Same with skip counting, 2, 4, 6, 8, that's adding 2 every time, or saying the odd numbers. 5 or 3, 5, 7, 9, that's adding 2 to odd numbers. Relating subtraction to counting backwards and taking away, that's the kind of going back to the idea that you're not making the number smaller, you're making the amount smaller. And counting backwards, like from 10, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, that kind of thing. Or taking away a group, like for example, a child has 5 pennies and they take away 3. How many do they have left? That's 2. So that's kind of relating those terms to subtraction. Understanding that addition and subtraction are opposites of each other. This is a huge thing, especially in the younger grades, because they are what are known as inverse operations, which just means it's a fancy term for opposites. They are opposites of each other, and that is what creates a fact family, which we'll get into later. And then finally, the third thing that was mentioned was the compute fluently and make reasonable estimates. When it comes to kindergarten first and second, this is really focused on the commutative property, which is the idea that when you have two numbers being added together, it doesn't matter what order they're in. No matter what order you add them in, they're going to equal the same thing. So, for example, 2 plus 3 is also the same as 3 plus 2. They're both going to equal 5. It doesn't matter that the 3 came first in one example and the 2 came first in the other example. So that's the commutative property. Another thing is the addition and subtraction facts. So this is like 1 plus 4 equals 5, 2 plus 3 equals 5, and all the other facts of 5. And then finally, this relates to fact families. And fact families are focused on just 3 numbers that work together to create a main number. So the main number, for example, let's say 5. 2 plus 3 equals 5, but the same thing is 3 plus 2 equals 5. That's going back to the commutative property. And then using subtraction, that's also part of the fact family, which is 5 minus 2 equals 3, and 5 minus 3 equals 2. One thing to note is the commutative property only works with addition. So, for example, with subtraction, you don't want to confuse your child by saying, oh, use the commutative property, because if you try to do 2 minus 5, that does not work. It only works with addition. So how does this relate to kindergarten, first and second grade? The number sense and the building blocks of addition specifically and subtraction, since that's what I'll really be focusing on when I'm looking at the Good and the Beautiful curriculum today, is in kindergarten, as you can see on this thing, they have a lot of jargon from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And so I kind of wanted to make it easier to understand. So looking at this first grade that we're looking at, kindergarten, basically what they're saying that a child needs to know by the end of kindergarten is how to use numbers as far as the amounts and their names, like understanding those and identifying those, showing how to add and subtract using objects with either part whole mats or 10 frames or number lines, Subdizing, this is knowing how many of an object are in a set without counting. So for example, this is something that is common with dice or dominoes or even 10 frames. Your child looks and they know that half a 10 frame is 5, and they don't have to go and count the 10 frame or the objects in the 10 frame. Or looking at a dice, seeing they roll a 3 and they don't even have to count the dots. It's 3. They know it. So that's subdizing. Then counting up and counting backwards, and counting groups of objects, so individual sets and combined sets. So that's kind of going into addition and subtraction there. So that's really what they're focusing on when it comes to kindergarten. Now, when you go into first grade, they add a little more to that. Children now begin pairing hands-on learning with addition and subtraction concepts, like adding 2, taking away, part whole, making 10. So actually like making larger numbers and understanding that there's more than one way to make a numbers. That kind of goes into math facts. Plus and minus, the actual vocabulary of addition and subtraction. Then children connecting different ideas to addition to one another. So adding on is the same as counting on. Children learning that addition and subtraction are related and opposites of each other. So that's another thing, is like just knowing that they're inverse relationships or operations, or opposite of each other. And obviously, if you want to read the math jargon on the side, I left it there just in case you want to pause the video so you can read that. But I want to just take the main points out, and that's what is under what it means. And then finally, in first or second grade, children are now starting to remember and say addition and subtraction facts from memory. Children memorize fact families, which is the 4 facts that relate to one number. So the 5 being 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 2 equals 5, 5 minus 2 equals 3, and 5 minus 3 equals 2. Those are the fact families. And then children beginning to apply that knowledge of place value and the properties, like the commutative property, to larger problems, like addition and subtraction with larger numbers, larger than 20 specifically, once they start getting into the tens and hundreds. And then children can estimate an amount based on basic knowledge of addition and subtraction and number sense. So being able to be given 2 numbers and using benchmark numbers, which benchmark numbers are like numbers that are easy to compute with. So for example, 10, like if a number is close to 10, then you can estimate by thinking of tens versus trying to count by 8s or count by 7s in the beginning, and 5s as well, and 2s as well. So skip counting, really, that kind of is where estimation comes into play when it's with the younger children. So now that we kind of have a basic understanding of the importance of number sense in those early grades of K, first and second, let's take a look at how the Good and the Beautiful really uses this knowledge of number sense and the foundation of number sense in their curriculum. One thing I kind of wanted to highlight about the Good and the Beautiful math, this can actually be found on one of their question documents. I have the link below in the description box, so if you want to take a look at some of their frequently asked questions, you can, but this is kind of where I got these 2 main topics here. And I'm just going to do a quick read over it, but obviously you can skip this part. But basically, the Good and the Beautiful math supports traditional methods by teaching basic math facts and universally recognized traditional algorithms, basically ways to solve math. Children memorize math facts, but our math program is not based solely on rote memorization, but also gaining a deep understanding of numbers and relationships among numbers. Our strong emphasis on developing a solid number sense leads naturally into helping children understand the reasoning and application of standard algorithms. Children quickly learn and memorize mathematical algorithms when they first understand what the numbers and operations represent. This is kind of going back to the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. They really talk about building that basic number sense first before you get into the memorization of those algorithms, because when you get that basic number sense first, it really gives your child a strong foundation on understanding those algorithms without questioning them later. Then also, the Good and the Beautiful math curriculum offers a balanced approach to teaching mathematics. The curriculum includes components of multiple styles, starting with concrete hands-on learning, moving gradually to conceptual understandings of math. So for example, like the equations, working on equations, that's more the conceptual understanding of math because they are looking at numbers and not so much amounts of objects in front of them. The curriculum is written with a real-life living math approach and is also written to meet the needs of different learning styles, including visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And for those of you that don't know what that means, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, those are learning styles as far as how your child learns best. If they learn visually, then they like watching or seeing things. Auditory, they can hear and understand things just from hearing about concepts. And then kinesthetic is really hands-on movement. So there's a few lessons in the Good and the Beautiful math where like the child actually gets up and walks a number line. So that's kind of an example of kinesthetic, along with the smaller things like hands-on manipulation of objects in front of them on the part whole mat and things like that. So that's kinesthetic. But one thing I want to highlight here is that they do real life living math. And I love this about the Good and the Beautiful. It's not keeping it disconnected from real life. That was one thing as a teacher. I was always asked, how does this relate to us in real life? And the Good and the Beautiful does an amazing job of relating all math to real life. And I'll be so interested to see when they start getting further along in their levels, when they get closer to high school, a lot of the algebra that they do and pre-calculus and all that crazy stuff that they do in math. I will be very interested to see how they relate that to real life because it is a very difficult concept to do or to relate to. But as far as the kindergarten curriculum goes, it's just amazing when they relate the math to real life situations through stories and all that, and which you'll see when I go through the books. Now, one thing I kind of want to highlight, and this is something I've highlighted in my first video, was the Level K at a glance. I just wanted to look at the number recognition and the number sense operations. These are really what I'm going to be focusing on in this video. I want to highlight the idea of the strong foundation of number sense that the Good and the Beautiful really does through their number sense and operations and number recognition. So the things I have highlighted here: identifying numbers 0 to 20, counting up to 20 objects, counting by twos up to 20, even and odd numbers up to 20, counting up starting at numbers 2 to 20, compare numbers and amounts, including equal and not equal, more and fewer, compose and decompose numbers up to 20, that's basically addition and subtraction, addition with the sum to 10, sum being the total, addition with 10 plus a number with a sum up to 20, mastery of addition of numbers 0 to 5, subtraction with the minimum to 10, so that means the highest number being 10. Then beginning an understanding of place value through 100. So these are all the things I'm going to really focus on during this video, specifically focusing on how the Good and the Beautiful scaffolds their learning. And when I'm talking about scaffolding, I kind of meshed two definitions together that I found were the best way to describe it. But scaffolding is breaking up learning into chunks and then providing tools or structures with each chunk to help your child learn. Another definition that's a really good example of it is scaffolding, or the practice of supporting learners as students gradually become more secure in their understanding. So the Good and the Beautiful does a very great job of scaffolding their learning in different concepts. And I'm going to kind of show that the scaffolding they do with place values, with counting, with addition and subtraction, and math facts, which kind of go with addition and subtraction. So just keep in mind the word scaffolding. It means breaking it up into smaller pieces that build upon learning in a way. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at the Good and the Beautiful and how they do this in their curriculum for the math, level K. So let's take a look at how the Good and the Beautiful introduces place value. Now, you've probably seen this already in my flip through video, part 1 of this series,
But daily dose is an everyday part of a lesson, and place value is included in this every single time you teach a lesson. So let's say you're doing 3 days a week. 3 days a week, you're going to be talking about place value. And place value is represented with the place value chart with the hundreds, tens, and ones chart that you get in the manipulative kit, along with base 10 blocks that you'll be using. You'll be using tens and hundreds. So you're not really going to be using one place value blocks or ones, which are normally shown as little cubes, because they're actually going to be representing them on a 10 block, which is 10 blocks together, and they'll color in as they go. So place value is something that they're starting off early in the curriculum. It's right in the first lesson, and they continue it through the whole course. And it's just giving them a nice strong foundation even before they get into adding numbers that are higher in the tens and hundreds. This will give them a nice idea and understanding of place value and the importance of place value. Now, when it comes to counting, there is a course prerequisite when you are starting the Level K course that relates to how many objects your child can count. If you look, you can see your child needs to be able to count up to 5 objects and identify the numbers 1 through 5. This is really important before starting this curriculum because they kind of start the counting and the scaffolding of counting at this point with the 5. And so if you take a look, the first thing that they're really going to do, and it should be a review for your child, is counting sequence. And you're laying out the numbers 1 through 5 and practicing your child recognizing that 1 comes first, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. You mix up the order of the cards, and then you have your child try and match which ones come first or in sequence. This is something your child will most likely be reviewing because they've already, if you're following the course prerequisites, your child should already know this. Moving on, they add on to that concept of the sequence by giving more practice with matching the amount of an object along with the number. So you can see here when they're doing cardinal number practice, they're lining up the numbers in sequence, but then they're also putting B manipulatives with each number for the amount that that number represents. This is another building block of counting that your child should already know when you start this course, but you can see that like it's showing that it's that as the numbers get larger, the amount of objects grow. And this is going to be a building block of addition. So this is almost scaffolding a little bit for addition. Further along, you start getting into comparing numbers, and this is something where this should be newer to your child. Your child will learn to count up to 10 and count objects up to 10, and then another building block of counting and addition and subtraction is comparing numbers. And they go and use the B manipulatives with the 10 frame, and you can kind of see that they are putting the B's next to each other and the amounts of B's being different. So as you can see, it says one day as Max was out by the beehive, he noticed 2 groups of bees gathered drinking water from 2 puddles. One of the puddles had 5 bees drinking from it, and one of the puddles had 3 bees drinking from it. And so you're going to have those B manipulatives, you're going to set them out, and you're going to compare those 2 numbers. And so that's showing the size, which one has more, which one has fewer, which is, you can see from the practice over here, that's something that they practice, which this has more than this, or this is how much. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4 is more than 1. So it's giving them that basic number sense of understanding quantities and the size of quantities tied to the written numeral, which is important when it comes to addition and subtraction later as well. And then they also talk about fewer. Getting further into it, and I think I mentioned this earlier in the video, but subitizing is when a child, and you can see they give you a note right here, which is so nice for those that don't know it. Subitizing is being able to instantly recognize without counting the number of objects present in a small group. Helping children pick up this skill at a young age will allow them to more quickly develop mental math strategies in the future.
And some of those math strategies they're referencing to are the recall of math facts, addition facts, subtraction facts, multiplication facts, and all those things. So being able to subsidize, they play a game, and it's just, you know, I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but the idea is having them practice being able to identify without even counting. So a 10 frame is a perfect way, and I'm so glad that the Good and the Beautiful uses the 10 frames throughout the whole curriculum, because it's a great way to help your child visualize just from looking at the spaces that are empty versus the spaces that are filled. That is something that leads them towards being able to use dice and dominoes to subsidize as well. And then even just groups of objects right in front of them, not even lined up, but just like a pile of them. My son is able to do that with numbers under 5 right now, and it's just incredible to watch a child just look at a pile and be like, oh, that's 3, and you're like, oh. So that is a big skill in basic number sense that you want your child to really have before moving on. So they talk about it in here. So that's it for counting. There are a few things that are going to come up in the addition and subtraction portions of this video that deal with counting, but they really help more scaffolding the addition and subtraction. So let's take a look at those. With addition, one of the basic foundations of addition is the idea of counting on. And this is one of the first things that the Good and the Beautiful curriculum introduces when it comes to how they scaffold the learning for addition. So counting on is one of the things they introduced in the beginning, and just the idea of counting on from a number. So like, for example, it says take out numbers, flashcards 1 through 10. One day Max is exploring. Let's continue. As he started to count, Max watched the bees move from the first flower to the next. How many flowers has Max counted the bees landing on so far? Yes, 2. Lay out the number of flashcards 1 and 2. What number comes after 2? So they're starting to count on from a number that they stopped at. And that's a really important skill, especially in addition, because it helps them understand the concept of +1, which actually comes later in this curriculum. Moving on, you see that they have a little introduction to addition, and it is used on the 10 frame, and they kind of do more of not so much a equation where they're adding with the number, the plus sign, and the equal sign, but more of a visual representation of addition. And they use the 10 frame with the bees to kind of show how that would look. They're not even really introducing the equations until later. However, they do mention the word plus in this lesson. So they are familiarizing your child with the word plus and it relating to addition. Further along, they go into the idea of part whole, which is where you use that part whole mat. And this is kind of showing how how a number is broken up into 2 parts and it creates a larger number. So it's just giving more of a structure for seeing addition happening rather than just having it in front of you where you have a group of bees and a group of bees and you put them together. You're showing that there's 2 parts and they create this one whole that when they get added together. So that's another aspect that they go into. One of the things that relates back to kind of the foundation of the program for the Good and the Beautiful math curriculum is the fact that they represent math in multiple ways. One of those ways is with stories. Stories are a great way for children to visualize math in the real world, and they start that off early on in the curriculum. So they're giving wooden cubes with the part whole mat, and you're telling your child a story so that they can kind of visualize what's happening and make it happen on the part whole mat while before moving on to something. And you can see right here too, this is also something I mentioned in the flip through video, but they tie art into this, and you'll see later when we get to story word problems, there's some really good ones later. But with you can see they're doing the flowers and they're showing that there's one part here and one part here, and if you put them together, how many do you have? They're really just introducing addition here, not really getting into too much of the equation portion.
once you get further along, they introduce the plus sign. You've already mentioned the word plus in multiple lessons before this, but now they're actually giving your child a look at what an equation looks like when it comes to addition and what this plus sign means. So it's nice that they start off not even like going into number symbols and signs, but they start off with the actual concrete hands-on portion and letting children visualize it first with those hands-on manipulatives before even getting into this algorithm that was mentioned earlier. They show addition in other ways too, which is nice. So it's not just with objects, but tally marks, which is something that I feel is not something practiced very often in schools anymore. So tally mark addition is important. They also do pennies later. I think it's, number line addition, where you're like walking the number line. Hold on, it's here. No, they just introduce it here. But there's number lines in the back of the course book, and you just cut one of them out. Also laying down the flashcards and having your child walk the number line. So just another way to introduce and scaffold the learning of addition. Here they're adding pennies. This is all just different ways that they're showing addition before even tying the equation or the algorithm to the concrete thing. You can see they're putting it there, but it's not like the main purpose. They're just introducing different ways you would use addition in the real world as well. Then you get further along, and this is where they start the idea of adding on, which is the same as counting on. If you remember from the lesson that I did at the beginning of the video, this is an important concept for children to understand, that counting on and adding on are the same exact thing. So this is already being represented early on in the curriculum, which is really good. Now, this is where the part whole becomes an equation, and what they do is they introduce the part whole again, but now they're showing equations with the part whole. They're showing that part plus part equals whole, and that whole equals part plus part, which is kind of going into that commutative property, and they're introducing that early on. So really good stuff here. Let me just double check to see if there's any other addition. I've got some subtraction here I'm going to do later. Then the plus one. So this is going from counting on, which is plus one, adding on, which is plus one, and then actually using the term plus one and adding plus one to different numbers. So they're just building, they're scaffolding the whole idea of addition by giving them small chunks. Remember, scaffolding is giving small chunks to support the learner and build a strong understanding of different math concepts and building your child's confidence in those concepts. So let's see. There's also counting by twos, which I love this part. I can't even tell you. So there's counting by twos, that's skip counting, which deals with addition. And they start with just 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. But then they compare that to adding to, and they start with even numbers because it's the thing that they just learned about with counting by 2. So adding 2 to 2 is 4, adding 2 to 4 is 6, and going on from there. Now earlier in the curriculum, they talk about even and odd numbers, and they talk about with the odd numbers, when they're doing the odd numbers, they do, they show 1, 3, 5, 7. Well, that's where this comes into play. Now you're adding 2 to odd numbers. And they're going to remember that pattern of odd numbers back introduced earlier in the curriculum when they see 1 plus 2 equals 3. That's the next odd number. 1, 3, 5, 7. 3, 5, 7, 9. Like they're showing the connection. They're building off of that understanding of even and odd numbers and moving into adding 2 to even numbers first with skip counting, and then adding 2 to odd numbers, which continues the pattern of skip counting it by odds, I guess you would say. There's 2 more things here I wanted to show. Another concept that is something that's introduced, but it's something that's not required in kindergarten, is adding three numbers together. This is more first, second grade concept. But I love the way that they introduce it. They're doing it with a store, which is so real life relevant. Your child goes with you to the grocery store, they go to a toy store or whatever. They're not going to be buying just one item, or well, maybe they are, but let's pretend that they're buying more than one item. You're going to have a price for each of those items, and that's the way that they demonstrate adding three numbers together. You're getting three different items, and they each have their own price. You add those all together to get how much total. And I just love the way they introduce this. It's so smart. It's just so smart. And then finally, just to kind of highlight the fact that they do talk about the commutative property. Well, if you remember back to my lesson earlier in the video, that's not even a thing that they need to worry about until first or second grade, but they're getting them familiar with the concept. They're getting them familiar with the concept early on, so that when they get to first level 1 or level 2, first and second grade levels, they've already seen it. It'll be in their background knowledge because they've seen it in level K, and it should just build off of what they've learned here. So just love the fact that they did that. So let's go ahead, let's take a look at subtraction. So like addition, one of the early things they do with subtraction is they start with the idea of counting down, which is subtraction. It's subtracting 1 or minus 1. So they start with counting down. It's early on, and they start with this idea, which is one of the first building blocks of subtraction. Then moving on, just double check I don't have, no, that's a subtraction. Moving on, they introduce subtraction. They introduce the idea of subtraction, and they use a 10 frame to kind of help introduce that. So if you look here, they're going back to the story, which is, I think, this one right here. Nope. There's a story in here that kind of talks about subtraction and addition, but it has to do with a garden. And so they're taking the 10 frame out, and the child's hungry, so they're eating the carrots that are being planted and taking it away. So it's kind of introducing that idea of when you have a number and you take away some, that's what subtraction is, the idea of taking away from a larger number, a larger amount. Then they move on to introducing the minus symbol. So we introduced the plus symbol. Now let's give the children or your child an idea of what the minus symbol is. And it's just tying it to subtraction and the act of taking away. They give you a section where you're practicing subtraction with the part whole chart or mat. And when you're doing the part whole mat, it's starting with a whole for subtraction, and you're taking it away and then finding what's left. So that's really great that they do that as well. Next on the scaffolding journey of subtraction is they start taking away from a benchmark number. And if you remember, I mentioned earlier, a benchmark number is a number that's easy to remember and that children can relate to easily. 5, 10, hundreds, those are all benchmark numbers. When you get to money, 25, 10, and 5 are benchmark numbers. So they start with a benchmark number of 5, and they're starting to focus on taking away from 5 and just giving them a little more exposure to the idea of subtraction and using different colors. And then going into the garden again, and they're showing they're also tying it to addition, if you see that, which is going to play into the fact of the inverse operations that I was talking about earlier, or opposite operations. Addition and subtraction are opposites of each other. But then you have them practicing writing the actual thing here. Just like with addition, they have it where they're showing different ways of doing subtraction, taking away tally marks, which is subtraction. Minus 1, which is the next step of counting down from 1 or counting backwards. So minus 1 is adding or building off of that counting down concept. Now I just have to move into the second course book here because subtraction goes into that one. Subtracting 2 is another thing. They're just building off of what they've already done, and they're using the 10 frames. They're not getting away from the hands-on. They're still combining the equations with the actual visual. And over here you can see they're building off of that evens and odds again that they had earlier. It's just the flip of the addition. So that's something that they're doing. Number line subtraction, just like with the addition, they do it on a number line, which helps them visualize the steps. And if you look, their student worksheet even practices that, and it shows how to kind of figure that out. And then one that I wanted to talk about with the addition and subtraction are these story problems. It's basically word problems. Word problems are something that should be introduced early on because it's something that is just going to get harder and harder as they get older. But introducing them to the idea of solving word problems. And The Good and the Beautiful does an amazing job of including art in this. So they have these art pieces, they have a story that goes with it, and then you're having your child practice how to solve the problems based on the story. It's connecting it to real life situations or art situations or things like that. So very good way that The Good and the Beautiful does that. Finally, with math facts, they do a really good job of introducing this as well in such a realistic, real life method. And the one thing they start with is really focusing on making 5 and the idea of the math facts of 5. And the way they do this is they focus on the idea of a tug of war. I mean, how great can that be? I mean, they're showing children on one side versus the other side, and they're giving you the different types of math factors, the different types of ways that 5 can be made, and then they also tie it to the equations, which is great. They're tying the two together, they're showing it in a real life way, they're giving them a hands-on type experience, and then they're tying it to the equations that they're going to see later. So this is really an introduction to math facts. If you remember from my lesson earlier in the video, math facts are more of a first grade concept that need to be mastered, and especially by second grade, they're mastering their addition and their subtraction math facts. So the fact that she's introducing it in the Level K curriculum is amazing because, like I said before, when I was talking about the commutative property in addition, if your child is exposed to it early, it's going to be in their background knowledge and their prior knowledge, so that when it comes up again, they're going to be like, oh, I remember that. That's something that I remember learning in this level. And it's just going to build off of that. So the fact that she's even introducing math facts early on is great, not in a confusing way, tying it to real life situations. It's just amazing that she has this in here. Then further along, we get into the target 5, and I think I remember telling you about this in my flip through video. I am obsessed with these targets. I had never seen them before. They're in the back of the book here in the appendix. As you can see, they're these like little targets, and the one that they work on in this first lesson, they start with the 5s and they work their way down to 2, which I actually like that they start with the 5s because they just talked about making 5 earlier in the book. And so they're tying it to a story again. Her friend's doing archery practice, the girl in the story. Her friend's doing archery practice and he's talking about the 5s. And if you look, they're introducing this target where the target number you're trying to get is 5 and the different ways that you can get that target number. And as you can see, they're already putting kind of the commutative property in these targets here, so they're tying it all together. Whereas like the outside it's counting from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and the same thing in the middle, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 in the opposite direction. Or if you want to think about it, 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever way you want. But the point is, these targets, they are showing addition and subtraction facts. This is why I am so giddy over this. And if you think about it, so the targets here, they're showing addition problems. So whenever you are going in, I believe, Yes. When you're going in from the blue to the white to the red, it is adding. So 5 plus 0 is 5. 4 plus 1 is 5. 3 plus 2 is 5. 2 plus 3 is 5. 4 plus 1 is 5. 0 plus 5 is 5. So that's addition. Now, the flip side, if you go in, out, it's subtraction. So 5 minus 5 is 0. 5 minus 0 is 5. 5 minus 1 is 4. 5 minus 2 is 3. 5 minus 3 is 2. 5 minus 4 is 1. It shows the facts, the operations that are inverse or opposite of each other, all in the target right there. I mean, again, I said I was a math geek, but this is really, really cool. And then you tie it to the equations over here. So these are, the targets are introduced throughout, but I just love the fact that these are here. And then finally, let's move on because I could just geek out about that all day. The last thing they do, and I love this too, and I mentioned in my flip through video, the first part of this video, that I didn't know what they were going to use the fact families for, but after reading through this further, I was just like in love with what they did here. So from the appendix, this first family, the Tanaka family, they have 5 people. Now, fact families, if you remember from my lesson portion of this video, it's focusing on 3 numbers, almost like a triangle, and the 2 numbers on the bottom are the parts, and then the top is the whole. So for this family, they break it into 2 adults and 3 kids. And then 2 adults and 3 kids equal 5, the number 5 total family members. And the thing that's important to know about fact families is those are the only 3 numbers you're working with in a fact family, but you're doing addition and subtraction, and you're also using the commutative property as well. So if we take a look, they show this house, and they talk about how this family has parents and kids. There's 3 kids and 2 parents. The top little window here gets the 5. Then you have the 2 parents in this window and the 3 parents in this window. And then you make all the facts that create this fact family. So for this one, it says it in the instructions here, but if you were to follow through it, you'd see that 2 plus 3 is 5. So they did the parents plus the kids is the total. And then they flip it, the commutative property. 3 plus 2 is 5. So the kids plus the parents is the total. And then they talk about the subtraction, which is so important with addition and subtraction. Your children knowing that they're opposites of each other. If you have the total number of families and you want to, or the total number in the family and you want to find out how many kids there are, subtract the parents, which is 2. There's 3 kids. Total number of family, you want to know how many parents. 3 equals, or minus 3 kids equals 2 parents. So it's just, they tie it to a story again. They tie it to real life, and it makes it so concrete for the child to understand. So these are thrown in throughout the rest of the curriculum. However, I feel that they're not a major focus, and that it'll probably be brought up again in level 1 and in level 2, since those are the times when children really need to have fact families memorized and addition and subtraction facts memorized. So that was it for the fact families. So there it is. There's all the things that I'm loving about the curriculum so far and I haven't even started it. One thing I did want to mention that I didn't mention earlier in the video was that because it is a spiral and mastery type approach with math, those concepts that I was showing you throughout the video, those are reviewed constantly in the different lessons. Even if the lesson isn't focused on addition, subtraction, or counting, they are reviewed in the student worksheets, in the bonus activities, and through games and different methods. So you're not just getting one and done. You're getting it again and again and again, and your child is going to pick up on those concepts, and it'll help out so much. So thank you so much for watching this long video. I hope this helps some of you understand why the curriculum is so good for math, and I hope that I didn't bore you too much with the math jargon, but please subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on future videos, and please like and comment below if you have any questions, and or if you liked the video. And I look forward to seeing you soon. So stay tuned.